In this video, let us talk about functions in Python. Functions in Python again is a very, very important topic. And so far, you have already heard the term function many times. Every time I say that I'm using print, I say I'm using print function. Or if I am doing something like enumerate, I said that is a function. Or zip, I use whenever I use the word zip, I say zip is a function. So now let us understand what exactly is a function, what are the different types of functions in Python, and even more importantly, what is the requirement or what is the need for a function? Why should we use functions? So let us take an example first, and let me say that given an array of numbers, given a list of numbers, find the sum of numbers, find the sum of all the numbers in the list. Okay, suppose this is the question that has been given to us, and we have already solved this problem many times. Suppose I have a list of numbers here 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If I want to find the sum of all the numbers, what am I going to do? I'm going to say for num in nums, and I'm going to have a sum of number variable, and I'm going to make it 0. And then every time I find a number, I'm going to add that. So I'm going to say sum of numbers plus equal to num. Okay, and then I'm going to print the sum of numbers. And we got the sum of numbers as 15, which is correct. 5 plus 4, 9 plus 3, 12 plus 2, 14 plus 1, 15. Very good. Now imagine that doing such a simple task, like for example, finding sum of a bunch of numbers, we have to write 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code. And whenever we are trying to write any code for solving any particular problem in real life, we will be needed to find sum of numbers so many times. Sometimes we might have this list, and sometimes I might have a different list. Maybe here I have 11 and then 21 and then 33, 14 and 51. And if I want to find the sum of this array, again I might have to write this 4 lines of code. And this is definitely not a good idea. I have told you many times earlier that if you are repeating the same thing again and again, then definitely we are doing something wrong, and there has to be a better way to do it. So what we actually want is, we want this block of code, or we want this logic to be somewhere, to be stored somewhere. We just want to write this logic once, and we want to use this logic again and again whenever it is needed. And that itself, that is only a function. For example, there is a function to calculate sum. So if I use the keyword sum, you see the word turned green, which means it is a reserved word in Python. And if I just pass here nums, okay, I get 15. And if I have this nums2, and if I do sum of nums2, okay, I get the sum, and I don't have to write these 4 lines again and again. Of course, finding the sum is a very simple task, so the code is written in 4 lines. But imagine if the task was something more complicated, then the code would be much longer, and if I have to do that task again and again, I would have to write that many lines of code again and again, and which will cause a lot of problems. It will be a very bad design, it will be very prone to mistake, and it will make the code not at all readable. So these are some of the problems that will get solved by using functions. So now I hope you have understand what is the need for functions. Functions are used to save a block of code so that they can be reused in order to maintain code readability, in order to maintain code modularity. So now let me define functions for you. Function is a block of code, or a block of a few lines of code, that is supposed to do a specific task, and we want to save those few lines of code so that they can be reused anytime we want. And this is so that our code does not have any redundancy, our code is not error prone, and the code modularity is maintained. Now, what is code modularity, or what do I mean by modular code? It is something we will see later. But for now, just understand that whenever we talk about functions, it means that there is a block of code somewhere defined which does a specific task. In this case, we have a sum function, and the task of this sum function is to calculate the sum of elements that is passed to it. Okay, so I hope you got an idea of what is function, and now we will take a look at some of the functions in Python. There are two types of functions in Python. One is inbuilt functions. And for example, inbuilt functions, you can take example as like sum, or I showed you example of zip, or I can talk about enumerate, or I can talk about print, or I can talk about a function like sqrt, which will help you get square root of something, or there are so many different functions. And then we will talk about user defined functions. User defined functions means the functions that we are going to define as per our requirement. Our requirement might be custom, and there may not be an inbuilt function to specifically do what we want. So in that case, we are going to define our functions on our own, and that those will be called as user defined functions. So before we talk about user defined functions, I'm just going to quickly show you some of the inbuilt functions. A lot of inbuilt functions you already know, but still we'll talk a little bit about this, and then we will move to user defined functions, which is a very, very interesting topic. So here I have added some notes for you. Function is a block of organized reusable code that performs a specific task, and they help to reduce redundancy, improve readability, and maintain modularity. So let us talk about some inbuilt functions. So let me say built-in functions in Python. So the first built-in function in Python that you also came across in this course was length. So if we have a list called nums, and if we say len, then we can find the length or how many items are there in this list. So this length function, the purpose of this length function is to tell us what is the number of elements that we have in the list. Other very important function, built-in function, is print. So we can say print, or we can say print someone's name. Okay, we can say hello, and we are getting a response. So this print function is doing something for us, and this is also a built-in function. You came across input function. Okay, so input function is used to collect some information from the user. So enter your name, and this also returns something, for example name, and then I can print name. So print is also a function, input is also a function. We can say this, and you might notice that some functions are doing a task and some functions are returning some value to us. For example, this length function gives us something. I can store this as length. So this function is returning something that I can store in a variable. Just keep in mind, and we will talk about that a little bit later. So length of nums, I'm getting 5. This print statement is not actually returning anything. This print statement is just doing a task for us. And this input statement is returning something, which is, it is giving us the name. I talked about sum. So we have sum, and we can give a sum of 1, 2, 3, and it is giving us the sum of the list that has been passed. This also works with tuples. We can also create a tuple here. Okay, we'll call it 10, 21, and 32, and we are getting, sorry, I missed a bracket there, and I got the sum of the numbers. Then we also have functions like max and min. Say for example, if I have nums, instead of sum, I just want to find out what is the maximum in this list. So I can use the max function. I can take max and I can say nums. And I'm getting 5, which means 5 is the maximum highest number in this list. We can use min, and I can say num. I'm getting 1 because 1 is the minimum element in this list. And then I think we also looked at sorted as a function. We can say sorted, and we can pass nums. And when the term that I use is passing. Okay, I'm saying I'm passing this nums to this function. So nums here, and again I will elaborate on that a little bit later, but nums here is a argument. And when we talk about functions, there are two important terms we need to keep in mind. One is a parameter and one is the argument. In this case, nums is called as an argument to this function sorted. Okay, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. And one more very common function that you must have used till now, which is also type. So if I use type, so this function tells us what is the type of the object that has been passed to this type function. So here again nums is the argument. In this case, this tuple is the argument to the sum function. And just like this, we also have range function. So range function 1 and 10. So here 1 and 10 are the arguments that we are passing to the range function, and it is returning us something. Now what it is returning is a discussion for later, but we know that it is giving us something, and we can further pass the entire range object to another function, which is a list function. Okay, and we can pass this entire thing to another function, which is a print function. And you must have noticed that whenever I talk about function, it always involves this parenthesis, and we may or may not pass something in this parenthesis. So just like this, there are so many built-in functions in Python that we use in our day-to-day life, and it's not possible to show you all these functions, but I hope you got the idea. But now what I want to focus more is on the user-defined functions, how we can make our own custom functions. Okay, so let me expand on the idea that we started with, which was this. And suppose my requirement is that I'm writing a code where I very often need to find the sum of numbers in a list. and we know that this is the block of code, and of course there is a built-in function that already exists, which is sum. But suppose we don't know about that and we want to write this function on our own. So how do we do that? So whenever we talk about user defined functions, there are two parts to it. The first part is defining a function. Defining the function means declaring what that function is going to do. So in order for a function to do something, we need to say that what is something that we are going to give, and then what is it that we are expecting out of the function. For example, in this case, we want the function to take a list. That list can be anything. And whenever we give a list to that function, the function's responsibility is to calculate the sum and give it back to me. That is what is the expectation from the function. So we are going to set that expectation, which means we are going to define the function. And once we have defined the function, we need to call the function. Call the function means use the function. So defining the function you can think of as like creating a tool. Okay, like creating a tool, and like for example, you create a spoon, you manufacture a spoon, and calling the function means using the spoon. Whenever I need, I will take out the spoon and I'm going to use it. Okay, so let us see how we are going to define the function and then how we are going to call the function. So before we write a function to calculate the sum of numbers in a list, let us just write a function that will calculate sum of two numbers. Okay, so if you want to calculate sum of two numbers, let us say num1 is equal to 5 and num2 is equal to 10. What do? We do num1 plus num2, uh, and we'll say sum of nums is equal to num1 plus num2, and then we are going to print sum of nums. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to write a block of code that will be reusable and that will help me add two numbers and return the sum of the numbers. So, or let me just print the sum of numbers. So in order to write a function that will calculate sum of two numbers that has been given, we need to first define the function. I told you earlier that when we try to create a function, there are two steps. So I'm going to now define the function, and I'm going to use the keyword def. Def might stand for definition or defining, whatever. And then I have to give the name to a function. You can give any name to the function since the function is adding two numbers. So I'm going to give the name add. I can't use sum because sum is already a reserved word in Python. I will not be allowed to use it. So I'm going to say add, and then I'm going to give a colon mark. Okay, and then I need to write some logic. So this function is supposed to take two numbers and print the output of the numbers. So this function has to accept two numbers. So let me just say x and y. This x and y is representing the two numbers that we are going to give to the function. And here x and y are called parameters of the function. Now what is this function supposed to do with x and y? It is supposed to add x and y. So let us take x plus y and let me store it in a third variable, which is z. And then what is it supposed to do? It is supposed to print z. This is the task of this function. And once we run this, you see nothing happens because we have just defined the function. Now we need to use the function. In order to use the function, we just need to say add and then give the function what it needs. Say for example, I need to pass two numbers. So I'm passing 5 and 10. Here 5 and 10 are called arguments to the function. Okay, so many people get mix up parameters and arguments. Again, it is not very important to remember the nomenclature here, but actually the parameters are the placeholders while defining the function, and arguments are the actual values of those parameters. So here we can also actually write it as x is equal to 5 and y is equal to 10. This is also acceptable way of writing it, but in short we can also write it like this. So once we run this function, you see we are getting 5. Oh sorry, instead of printing z, I printed x. So you see, if I'm adding two numbers here, I'm getting the sum of the numbers. I can say 15 here and I'm getting 25. I can say 70 here and I'm getting 85. So this function is working. So this part is called as calling the function, and this part is called as defining the function. Okay, and we can define as many functions as I want. Let me define one more function which will print a greeting for somebody. So it will take a name and it will greet that person. So let me say greet, and it will take a name and then it will print hello. And we need to take the name of the person. So I'll say name, and for that I need to use a f string, and let me say hello and how are you. Okay, so now I want to greet somebody. So I will just call the function greet, and then I need to pass a name. So let me say Mr. Sharma. So what this function will do, this function will greet Mr. Sharma by saying, hello, Mr. Sharma, how are you? So this is one function. We can create another function to get, okay, so let us take the example with which we started, which is to get the sum of numbers in a list. So we want a function that will accept a list and it will give me the sum of numbers in the list. Very well. Let me take this example here and let me write a function here for that. So let me say I'm going to define a function. I'm going to say get sum of list. Okay. This is a good way of writing names of the function by being very explicit on what that function is actually doing. And what this function is supposed to take, this function is supposed to take list of numbers. Okay. And I'll put a colon, and then we need to, of course, have some indentation here. We need to have indentation here. So I'm going to say, I need the logic to calculate the sum of the numbers. So we have the logic here. I'm going to take this and I'm going to put the logic here, and instead of nums I have list of numbers. So let me take this variable, put it here, and then we have sum of numbers, so we can print the sum of numbers. And let me have some f string here. Let me say the sum is, okay. Now I have defined the function. Now I want to call the function. So let me say get sum of list, and let me pass 4 and 5. You see, it says the sum is 9. If I can add one more number here, it says sum is 19. So what we have done, we have written a user defined function, or we have written a custom function that will take a list and it will return the sum of the numbers in that list. So this function is actually now behaving the same way as a built-in function, which is 4, 5, 10. Okay, so we have duplicated a built-in function. Now keep in mind that this sum function is actually returning something. It is not just printing something, it is also returning something. For example, I can take a variable x and I can store it, and when I write x here, I'm getting the sum 19. But the way we have written our function, custom function, this is not returning anything, it is only printing. So I'll prove it to you. If I come here and if I say y is equal to, and then if I say y, I don't, okay, so this is printing here, but this y value actually is not doing anything. This y has nothing. But if you look at x, this x actually has 19 value. Why is that happening? Because the way we have written our function, it is printing something, but it is not returning anything. And earlier I also told you that functions usually they either do something or they return something. So if I want this function to return something instead of printing something, and so then I have to use the keyword return. Okay, and what do I want to return? I want to return the sum of numbers. So we can choose whether we want to just print the result or we want to return the result. Usually we want to return the result so that we can take that answer and then do something else with it. And if you want to print something, that is also fine. And if you want to do both of them, that is also okay. You can print as well as you can also return. So now if I change the function this way, and now if I come back here and if I run this line of code again, and now if I come, this get sum of list has actually thrown back the value 19, and that value has now gotten stored in y. And now if I run y, I'm getting the value 19. If you want to check y is equal to 19, it will say true. Okay, so this way we can define the function. Again, let us do a quick recap. What are the things to keep in mind? Whenever we are defining the function, we use the keyword def. Then we need to have the name of the function, and then we need to have the parameter of the function. Parameter of the function can be a number, it can be a list, it can be a dictionary, it can be anything. And you can have one parameter, two parameters, or 100 parameters, doesn't matter. Earlier when we wrote the function, we had two parameters. Here we are having just one parameter, and it will become a little bit more clear when we do a practice. But we need name of the function, parameters of the function, then code of the function, and that code will usually operate on whatever you have accepted. If you have accepted some numbers, you are going to perform some operation on the numbers. If you have accepted a list, you are going to do some loop or something on a list, and in the end you want to return something. Okay, and this something here is just one number. You can also return a list, you can also return a dictionary, you can return anything basically. Okay, and once this is done, the definition is over, and then we go to calling the function, and we can call the function whenever we want. We can come here and we can say a is equal to get sum of list. And by the way, the logic that we have written here is not specific to list. It will also work with tuples actually. So if I write a tuple and if I say 1, 2, 3, and this will give me the sum is 6. And if we check A, I'm getting 6. Here the statement is getting printed because I have the print statement here. If I remove this print statement, then when I run this, nothing will be printed. And if I want the value for A, I can come here and get A. If I change the value to 11, nothing happens. When I look at A, the sum is 16 because 11 plus 5 is 16. Let us take one more example of writing a function. So let me say that write a function to print a multiplication table of any given number. To print the multiplication table. So earlier I have shown you the code to print the multiplication table of any given number. Let me say if the number is 5, then we say for range 5, what do we print? And I'm going to say 5 times I, 5 into I. Okay, if I do this, I'm able to print this should not be 5, this should be 10 because we need to go till 10, and we are able to print the multiplication table for 5. Let me make it till 11 so that we have 5 tens of 50. Yes, so this is the complete multiplication table of 5. Now I want to write a function that will print the multiplication table of any given number. Okay, so let us define the function first. Let us say, and I'm going to say get multiplication table, and what do I need to pass? I need to pass a number, the number for which I want to calculate, for the number for which I want to print the multiplication table. And then I'm going to say, let me just take this code here, and I'm going to say for range in 11, and I'm going to, instead of 5, I need to have the number, and number into I will be equal to number times I. Okay, so this is how I have defined the function. Now if I want to call the function, I can say get multiplication table, and suppose I want to print the multiplication table of 9, so then I can print the multiplication table of 9. If I want to print the multiplication table of 17, I can print the multiplication table of 17 also. Okay, now suppose I want to also keep this dynamic. Suppose here we are getting the table till 10, but I want to print the table till 15 or 20. So how do I do that? We will need to pass that. We'll need to pass that as a argument to the function. So if I want to pass that as an argument to the function, we need to include that parameter while defining the function. So let me take this here, and let me add one more thing, which is count. How many counts we want to go? You can choose any other name also, and here we can say count. So user is going to give me count, and according to count I'm going to print. Okay, so now I'm going to say get multiplication table, and I'm going to say I want to print the multiplication table of 12, and I want to print it till 20. Okay, so I'll get the multiplication table till 20. I think it should be 21 because 20 is not included. So we are getting 12, 20 is a 240. Very well. Now suppose I want to give some default value of this count. I don't always want to I don't always want to pass this 21. I want it to by default print till 10, but if I say 20, 21 or 20, 31, then it should print till 20 or 30. So unless specified, there should be a default value. In that case, what you can do, you can say count is equal to 10 here. This means that if this count is not passed while calling the function, then it will take the value 10. Let it not be 10, let it be 11. Okay. So now what happens? The way we have written the function, if I don't give a count, then it will print till 10. But if I give a count, suppose I give a count of 30, then it will, sorry, it should be comma, then it will print till 30. Again, let me remind you, number and count are the parameters of this function. 12 and 30 are the arguments to this function. Actually, this 12, what 12 means is number is equal to, and this is count is equal to. Okay, this is the full way of writing, calling the function, but we very often don't write this way. We simply just remove, we keep it this way, and the order in which the parameters are defined, so first is number and second is count. So 12 will go to number and 30 will go to count, and that is how, let me bring it back to 20, and this is how the parameters and arguments are. Also here we can say that 11 is the default argument for count. So this is like this, we can say that this is the default argument for count. So I hope all of you got to know how functions are defined and how functions are used in Python. And in the next video, we will do a lot of practice, starting from very simple examples to slightly complicated medium difficulty level examples to gain mastery over functions in Python.